it was already past Remembrance Week, but the poppies and reds tend to stay here for quite a bit, well, for good reasons, lest we forget. There is something quite counterintuitive about this fence. I'm not quite sure if I've seen something like this. Usually, I imagine you build a fence, obviously to fence things off, and so you make sure that the structure is as solid as possible, but somehow they decided to do it like this, which totally intrigued me. So this deserved a photo. Weather-wise, it had been a rather bleak day so far, but that has kept me busy looking for tiny details lying around, like this one. Windsor, for those of you who are not from the UK, is incredibly close to the Heathrow Airport. In fact, it is just half an hour's train ride away from central London, and it's basically a space that the planes have to fly past in order to land in Heathrow. Well, at least that's what I thought was happening on that day, seeing a plane descending overhead in every 2 or 3-ish minutes. So in this series, there was a lot of me musing over planes. I'll return to this in a bit, but basically I shot this entire roll at 500. Right, so wherever there is water in the UK, you can expect to see some geese. The Thames flows through Windsor via one of its western reaches, and so it's no surprise that they all hang out here. They are mostly like harmless, benign creatures, until you see them attempting to bite each other, and certainly not when they attempt to attack you. Whoa, that was some rather flagrant, aggressive behavior going on. Here, I thought it would be interesting to see what the film does to a sunset scene. It's tungsten balanced, so it should dampen some of the yellow beams, but it would be interesting to see the extent to which it does it. Plus, seeing this lovely composition, I just couldn't resist. I thought I could do another one at a lower angle so that the birds would be visible against the sky instead of the waters. There are quite a few things that are worth noting from the roll of Cinestill 800t, and the first thing that I'd like to comment on is the color. So the Cinestill 800t, being marketed as a tungsten balanced film, basically means that it has an enhanced sensitivity towards blue light out of the RGB spectrum. And so if you shoot it under daylight, the result, as we have seen, is that the photos would come out with a bluish cast. But that's obviously not what this film is designed to do. But normally otherwise, it would make perfect sense for you to shoot tungsten film under tungsten lighting because it offsets that yellowish/orangish tint that would come into your photos if you shoot it with a normal film. So how tungsten balancing works is that by enhancing the blue sensitivity of the film, it kind of grabs any bit of blue that's present in a scene and render it as brighter and also more saturated. And because blue is a color that's complementary to yellow/orange, which is the color that's on the opposite end of the color wheel, it then rebalances the color temperature of the scene, and by this built-in mechanism of the emulsion, it turns a tungsten lighting shot into something that looks more normal to the human eye. Another implication though, riding off the first one, is the fact that the effective ISO of the film has increased substantially, and this has to do with the color of daylight. So here, as a helpful reference, I will refer to Ansel Adams' second book of his series, The Negative. So as explained by Ansel, the color of the light that we see from the sky could differ quite a bit depending on the time of the day and also the type of weather that you find yourself in. So usually where the sun is hitting directly onto something, the light tends to be more towards the warmer side of the spectrum, whereas for the shadows, which is mainly illuminated by clouds, would exhibit a cooler tone to it. So on an overcast day, which means that most things in a scene is going to be illuminated by the clouds, the color of the overall daylight would tend towards a more bluish temperature, which was exactly what happened on the day that I shot this roll of film. There was blue everywhere, both in the highlights and the shadows, in the skies and the seas, and so effectively the ISO is actually increased because of what's in the frame. This did create some problems, especially in the skies. So obviously with clouds in the sky, the color of the light coming into the camera would predominantly be blue. The sky was blocked in quite a few of these shots where I could not recover any detail in the clouds, nor could the lab, because if they could, they would have. On the other hand though, it wasn't that much of an issue when it comes to the sunset shots. I think it worked pretty well in that it conveyed a sense of brilliance with the light softly pouring over from the horizon, and I wouldn't mind it at all because it did reflect what I was thinking when I shot the scene. For other cases, I simply just cropped out the shots where I did not like the sky, so overall this wasn't like a deal breaker. Another interesting discovery from this roll features lightning-like artifacts actually on most of the frames on this roll. If you look closely, many of the shots had thin little red streaks in one part or another of the frame. Sometimes they look like tree branches and sometimes they look like forks, but anyhow they would appear pretty much in the same orientation across different frames. I searched online to find out what was happening, and apparently quite a few people have the same issue. So the discussion online was pointing me towards the issue of static fogging. Following this line of reasoning, basically, under dry and cold conditions, electrical charges and tensions could more readily build up in the emulsion of the film, and so if you advance the film or if you spool it too quickly, the electrical charges would then go off in the film and it would cause a fogging, and that's what's causing these patterns on my film. So according to CineStill's official information source, the film is initially a motion picture film. It's been converted for photographic use. What needs to happen for this to be possible is that the Remjet layer on the motion picture film has to first be removed, and then the film be spooled into 35mm canisters, and then the film would go into your camera like any other film. So CineStill as a company mainly take fresh stock from Kodak Vision 3 500t, which is a motion film, processes the film by removing this layer, and then turns it into the typical 35mm canister format that cameras could take up. Now this is quite a foreign experience for me because of all the photos that I've shot on my Olympus XA, I've never had this problem. The day I was shooting this, it was probably quite cold, and also the UK is not exactly the most humid place on the world, though there could be a myriad of factors that are contributing to this occurrence. So quite obviously, for one, it could be me winding the film too quickly in my camera. Two, it could be the lab who is spooling the film too quickly before processing it. But thirdly, more interestingly, it could also have to do with the way that the Cinestill 800t is being made. The Remjet layer, in simple words, is a protective layer on the base of motion picture film that protects from light piping, base scratches, static, which is what we have seen to be the issue, and halation of highlights and exposure. So basically having this layer removed would render this film exceptionally susceptible to things like static and also halation, scratching, and whatnot. At this point, I can't be conclusive as to what really was causing like these streaks on the photos. It could be me, it could be my lab, it could also be a manufacturing issue. I have another roll with me that is supposedly from the same batch. I will also shoot that. I'll be sure to wind it ultra slowly. Let's see what happens, and I will report back in a few weeks' time. Halation refers to the bits of red swellings, if you will, around areas of high exposure levels. So this typically occurs to areas surrounding specular highlights. It also occurs on the borders where a high exposure area kind of bleeds into a much lower exposure area, and this also has to do with the Remjet layer being removed. So here is a simplified version of the structure of the film, and the job of the Remjet layer, being a black layer at the base of the motion film, is originally to absorb excessive light that travels through the emulsion and reaches all the way to the base. But now that it's removed, where there is a flood of light, it could hit the emulsion once, reach the base, and get reflected back into the emulsion and expose it another time in areas surrounding the bright object. This, from a technical perspective, is obviously undesirable because it could give a really bizarre look to the photos that you shoot on this film. But undeniably, it does look interesting. I especially liked how the geese looked as if they were glowing in red light. And also in the edges of these tree branches. The light from the sky was basically spilling over onto the edges of the trees. It's quite cool, I'd have to say. Alright, so here is my final verdict. Now, as of now, I would tend to use this film for personal use, aka shooting photos for my own amusement, rather than shooting it for professional use. It does have a rather distinctive look, I would say, and the fact that it was a motion picture film being modified into a photographic film does give it quite a bit of room as a photographer to really play along and just stretch it really to get creative results. For instance, one of the things that you could really do is to shoot the tungsten balanced light in lighting conditions other than tungsten, like what I did. Though I'll have to add that scraping off the Remjet layer does cause some sort of compromise in relation to the stability and the reliability of the film, because now that the protective layer is scraped off, basically the film could be ruined by the slightest handling errors, like winding the film too fast. So for the purposes of creating professional work, I would probably stay away from the film unless a client happens to be up for something bizarre. But then really, apart from that, as a consumer film, just try to shoot it and do all sorts of crazy stuff with it and you will be surprised. And another point is that if I were to shoot it again, I would probably rethink how I compose my photos. Now, as you've seen, there were quite a few frames in which the sky was totally blown out, and because of this enhanced blue sensitivity, if I were to shoot something that's blue, aka the sky or maybe the waters, I will try harder to kind of protect the highlights and hopefully retain some detail in the clouds and also maybe in the ripples of the waters, which I think is absolutely doable. I did not originally intend to shoot this entire roll of film under daylight because obviously it was designed for tungsten, but then I also did not expect to finish up the entire roll in just one day to Windsor, and so I will be doing more tests coming up, and stay tuned. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next Saturday. Bye!